Oh, right. Welcome back. We're going to start tackling the actual wiring. We got our dash hogged out and mounted up so we can start tackling everything else. So, I guess let's just get started with some of the easy stuff and then we'll get into the more difficult stuff a little bit later. All right, so basically we've got our rough spot here. We got our wire plugged into our gauge, and then we have the O2 sensor piece. So all that we're gonna start off doing here is probably just zip tying this guy start getting things zip tied into place where they should pretty much sit. And we can figure out what we're doing after that. All right, so I basically took the wiring harness and threw it on the engine. Then I was going to run all of these wonderful computer lines to the current engine harness. But things just kind of didn't turn out that way. So I essentially just chopped apart the entire engine harness and we're going to make our own harness with the wires that we have thrown out here. So anyways, I went and separated all of the wires. We got our gray set, our white set, blue set, and then we have the multicolors. So essentially what we're looking at is the white are all in wires. So that's going to be like your temperature, fuel pressure, those type of things. Basically feeding information in to the computer. And then the gray set, that's going to be kind of low precision outputs. So that's like coils. Let's see, the fan turning on and off. VTEC actuation, I believe, is on there. And what's the other one? Oh. Maybe fuel pump. That would make sense. And then the blue, those are going to be pulse width style. So they're the higher precision operations. So they're going to be injectors, idle air control, probably some more VTEC stuff. And yeah, essentially that's what that's going to be. So since this is an FT450, it's got a small amount of inputs and outputs. If you got like the 550, it would have a secondary harness that has more inputs and outputs. But this is going to be enough for what we're doing with this guy, because we're not going high end on much of anything. So that's kind of our rough layout. Of course, our wires over here, we've got red for power, black for ground, the other black for sensor ground, and then the green is sensor power. So that should be about 5 volts running around there. Well, anyways, that's the rough gist of it. Now, what I'm probably going to do is get the instructions out that has a suggested operation for a K24, and we're just going to start pulling our wires and probably just taping them to our other wires. So we got like injector wires, so I think we'll just grab some masking tape and we'll just tape them together so we can make sure that a wiring harness kind of lays out the way we want it to. So yeah, that'll be kind of fun, and we'll just get to cracking on it. So we're kind of at the midpoint of wiring this puppy. We've got kind of 3 different clusters that we're going to be working with. We've got this section over here, which is going to hang out with the injectors. That's gonna kind of be these guys. We could feed more through there, but I think that's kind of a good spot. I don't want to get too many things in one pile. So we'll get that set. Then we've got this other set that comes up on the cage here, kind of wraps around. And it's mainly because I didn't want these coils that kind of point in a certain direction. I didn't want to monkey with them and bending the wires the wrong way. So we'll have a kind of a smaller harness come off of here to run all the coils, along with the temp sensor, and we got the cable for the exhaust cam sensor, which is going to be our main sensor on that. And then we'll have this front central one, which will run our fans, fuel pump. We've got the TPS, VSS, and air temperature. So it's like we could probably run air temperature over here, maybe, but this is going to be the hot side. I think I want the air temperature on the cool side. So it'll be better off over there where the cool side is going to be. So yeah, not too bad. We've got 2 outputs that I just have wrapped up and shoved over there. That is basically 2 outputs that I'm not currently using. So we'll figure out something to use with that. I'm sure we can find something out real quick and simple with that. Always can use more inputs, outputs, whatever. So anyways, that's where we got our blue tape, kind of taping things together to get a kind of rough layout of where things are going to be. So I think our next point is I need to figure out where to put the power units. So we're going to have certain home run power plug-ins, and we'll have to figure out where we're putting our 4.5 5-volt junction, because we'll need that for some of the sensors. So, well, that's kind of what we're looking at right now. Alright, so at this moment, we have most of our wiring taken care of for the actual power section of it. We've got our switch here. That's got power coming in from the junction block, and then power going out to a relay that turns on our, basically our switch. So this is the ignition switch. And then we've got our ground set up here. That's got a separate ground wire that comes up to the front and hooks on to chassis ground. So that's pretty well set up there. We've got our switches that are controlling, I believe they're controlling ground. Yep. Our switches are controlling ground for all the relays. So our start button, obviously it doesn't do anything right now, but our start button is plugged into the relay, like a separate little relay that runs then the big relay for the starter. So that's hooked up. It gets power straight from the junction block for that relay, and then its switch side is from the switch here, and the ground of course is controlled here. Our next is our fan override, and all that we did with that was we came with the ground out of the ECU. So we took the ground out of there, ran it through the switch, and then ran that back to the relay in the rear. So that pretty much does that. So when the modular commands the fans to turn on, it'll ground what goes up to the switch. If the switch is on, it'll ground the relay, and then it'll crank on. If not, it won't do anything. So that's nice. Then our future water pump for the intercooler, that's right there. We might do the exact same thing with one of the extra outputs from the ECU, but I haven't quite decided on that yet. I'm thinking switch will be just fine for that. Not a big deal. Of course, off over here you can see our relay set shoved in on the board. I've pretty much tested that they all work. Fuel pump works, fan relays work. Haven't quite tested the injectors and the coil relays, but there's no reason why they shouldn't work. So we're pretty much set there. That's all looking pretty nice. Now we're gonna have to get in the main bits of the actual harness and get them plugged into the rest of the units where they need to go and figure out where our wire routing is gonna end up. All right, so we're getting pretty close to being able to snatch everything and plug it together, but there is a couple things that need to be done, and namely that's with these VTEC solenoid stuff. So we need to protect some of this stuff with wonderful diodes. Now in the instructions for the FT450, they tell you put a diode there. But sometimes you might wonder, why the heck do we actually need to put a diode between something like that? Could just blindly go, okay, let's just do it. But hey, what's the point in that? Anyways, you have yourself a diode. It's got values. They give you kind of an idea which way is which. So in the 450 manual, it has a list of diodes that you should use. I don't even remember what I got for this one. I got a 1N5408. Anyways, on your diode, you have a line. See the line there? That's going to be your cathode. And on the drawing, here, little bit hard to see, but you can see where the line is. That line is representative of this line. So that pretty much tells you the flow through the diode. Because essentially diodes are pretty much one-way operations. So as you can see here, we've got power on this side of the solenoid, and then we have the ground over there. So if you had this diode where the flow was going this way, you would be automatically shorting out from power to negative, and that would piss everything off. So what we're doing is we're making the flow go from the negative to the positive. And then you're probably thinking, why the heck would you want a flow to go from the negative to positive? Well, here is the fun part about solenoids, is since they're magnetic devices, when you suddenly remove power, or not power, but kind of power too, but when you suddenly remove something, either power or ground, that magnetic force inside has to pretty much collapse. And when you have a magnetic field collapse, that creates power. That's kind of the same on how Hall sensors work, is you have something magnetic going around and that magnet generates power. So with this electromagnet, when it collapses, it generates power. And all that diode is doing is pretty much shunting that power to a safer spot for it to go. So that way you don't run the risk of frying your ECU or having it backfeed power into the whole circuit, and you try to turn your car off and it doesn't actually turn off because something's being backfed. So that's the point of the diode. Some people may complain about the explanation of it, but you know, that's kind of how I take it, so who cares? So for our harness, we're just going to cut into our wire, and then we're just going to splice this guy right on up in there. So we'll have our diode, and make sure our stripe is going to what we're going to deem as a positive, pretty much like that. So now we got that guy crimped in there. And then we're just going to come up to our ground side, kind of do the whole same thing. Clamp it in, make sure we're tight. Strip our other end. And away we go. That feels pretty tight. And there's our rough wiring. So we have the flow going from the negative into the positive. So no flow can go that way, but flow can go that way, protecting our solenoids and our ECU and everything else. Then we basically put on a little bit of shrink tubing, and we'll shrink away, and we got ourselves a harness. All right, so back here we are basically done with our wiring. I mean, we got all of our sensors plugged in, and we got everything kind of run about where it needs to be. So I guess we just need to start buttoning this thing up and making it look kind of a little more presentable. So guess it's about time to start luming this thing up. let's just start putting her together. All right, so as a whole, I think we're at a pretty decent spot. We got all of our wires buttoned up, tucked away. Even some of our wires over here. That's pretty nice. And I also found in my pile of previous used parts, an air conditioner. So if nothing else, it can at least remove some of the humidity out of this place so I don't die. Hopefully, that means I can get more videos out. But anyways, we can see everything there coming from our dash. We got that guy. So everything is kind of 90% buttoned up. So there are just a few little here and there's that I need to take care of, and then we will be kind of ready to attempt starting this thing. So that'll be kind of nice. So got a few things still with a battery, a couple grounds to run around, but that's doing pretty decent. So the fun things that I found out with doing this fuel tech is I don't need that map sensor that I put on there, because the fuel tech has an onboard map that isn't a crappy one like a Holly. And then I'm not going to be using the idle air, so I think we'll just set it at a little higher of an idle and just let it roll, because who cares? So all that we really have on the throttle body is the throttle position sensor. We'll need to still get an air temp sensor. That's kind of missing. I was planning on getting that when I do the whole intercooler setup. So yeah, I think we're at a decent spot for today. And we'll just have to swing it from there, see what we end up with. Hopefully this all makes sense, all jobbled together. It's been a long couple weeks of high temps and not a lot of fun. So hopefully we got through most of that and we'll be able to keep strolling forward. Anyways, thanks for stopping by and watching. Hopefully we'll get to see you again later.